Somehow I made it through last week, and that brings us to right in front of UFC 274. And while this video is going up far later than I wanted, I got busy and things happened, and my life was hectic. But enough whinging. There are some decent fight on this cards in the prelims, but if I'm being fully honest, this isn't a card I'm really super pumped about. I'm excited to see Cerrone fight again. I think these are great title fights. I think there's some good matchups on the main card, but nothing in the early prelims really jumps out to me. Nothing in the prelims jumps out to me. This is kind of just a more average card carried by its title shots. And that's just my frank opinion of it from the beginning. But the decent fights are decent fights. You have Tony Ferguson, Michael Chandler, retirement fight of Donald Cowboy Cerrone and Joe Lauzon. And there's even accompanied by a pretty good light heavyweight bout. And more importantly, the two title fights, Rose Namajunas and Charles Oliveira, both defending their belts. But all that being said, let's jump right into the early prelims. We start off with the 9-3-0-1 Journey Newson, winning the award for Best Name, trying to finally get a win in the UFC against the 10-1 Fernando Fernie Garcia. 2 inches in height and 3 years age, both favoring Garcia with even reach across the board. With Newson, I don't know what to say. He's looked fairly mediocre in his UFC run so far. He's lost once by unanimous decision, once by KO in the first, and then an overturned KO. And going off that, in the UFC, his striking has been entirely dead with no takedowns to speak of. There's been a singular submission attempt. Outside the UFC, he's gone 3-3-3 in each of the categories, and while that looks good, that's all that is. That's that. Garcia in his career outside the UFC has been primarily a grinder, 6 decision wins in his Contender Series fight. He did win by KO, but he was being outstruck, which, yes, that is how some fighters work, but I feel like the Contender Series, you kind of have to take those wins with a grain of salt going forward. He does have a kind of submission game with 3 wins in that category, but that's all there's really to speak of here. It's an early prelim fight. So I'm going to default to Vegas odds and run with Garcia. I do think he's been more consistent to back my claim up, and I think with such a limited sample, he looks like the better fighter, but it's, again, a very limited sample, and who knows, maybe Newson's evolved enough since his last fight to take another step and try and keep his job in the UFC. 14-2, Ariana Soriso Carmelosi, I said all that wrong, looks to build a streak against the 7-2 Lupita Lupi Godinez, with even height and reach and a 1-year age gap. Carmelosi has a history of knockout ability and has won in the UFC, and along with that, she has a striking total with a lower landed than absorbed, which isn't great. Power is her equalizer, and while it's not a bad way to fight, it is a little odd to see at this weight class in the women's division. She has shown a good ability to land takedowns, take advantage of them. She pulled 5 against Estela Nunes for a submission win, and in her career, she has pulled 2 submission wins. I don't really think that's a major part of her game, but it's more of an availability and pocket trick for her. Godinez is the flip side, and much more of a ground-focused fighter with a 4.57 takedown average across 4 fights, and a classical striking differential for a grappler of 1.97 to 2.07. She has also had the issue where even in fights where she has secured multiple takedowns, she's still lost by decision. So it looks like that if she can keep control, she'll grind it, she'll take that. But it seems like if people are skilled enough, they'll break her control, get to the feet, and keep the fight where they want, which is a little important to note in some fights. I don't know how important here, though. In the end, the favorite is Godinez, and I kind of get why. Carmelosi has a poor takedown defense, and Godinez is much more aggressive and successful in securing takedowns. So I'm going to lean her and go with the Vegas odds. But moving on, 7-1, Clayton K.R. Rodriguez looks to get his first official UFC win. Contender Series doesn't count, against the 9-3-1 CJ Vergara. Vergara is 4 years older, and he does take an inch in reach. Now, Rodriguez is a mixed bag, but he seems somewhat rounded in regards to how he's won outside the UFC. 3 KO, 2 submissions, and 2 decisions. His only loss so far coming by decision. Based on his Contender Series performance, he looks to have found a groove with his striking, with 91 significant strikes landed to 21 by his opponent. But I can't speak to a ground game too much in that regard, but there is some of it based on fights outside the UFC. Vergara is much more of a slugger in comparison. He has 6 KO wins outside the UFC and 93 significant strikes landed against Ode Osborne, plus a KO win in the Contender Series. He's definitely proven that he can slug and he'll hang in there with people. But in the end, the favorite here is Rodriguez, and I'm going to agree. If only based on the variety that KR brings to the table. Vergara has some takedown defense, but he never seems to throw the ground game at all. So it seems like if we're staying on the feet, I think Rodriguez's variety gives him the advantage here. 9-1, Tracy Cortez looks to try and keep winning against the 8-0-2, that's an odd one, Melissa Gatto, with Gatto being 3 years younger and taking 4 inches in reach. Cortez is very much a grinder throughout the UFC so far, every win going to decision. She does have a striking game, 3.85 landed, 2.4 absorbed, and while she has outstruck all of her opponents, it seems to never be the premier focus of her game. The ground game takes that with a 3.0 average across her UFC and an 87% of takedown defense. She controls when she wants to go to the ground. Now, Gatto has shown much more of a striker, and she has more of a knockout ability. 4.19 landed to 2.75 absorbed and a high takedown defense. Outside the UFC, she had a very good ground presence for submission wins, but based on that, I can say it looks very varied, but in the UFC, I've seen more of the striking. It's hard to tell if that's how she'll continue to trend, but it's worth knowing going into this. Now, Vegas likes Cortez by a narrow margin, and I'm going to agree, and with a caveat though. Gatto can be dangerous on the ground, but Cortez has the advantage and the hot hand. In these close fights, I think the hot hand matters a good bit, depending on the fighter. And in this fight, I think the hot hand matters, and I'm going to pick Cortez. 27-8, Francisco Masaranduba, said that wrong. Trinaldo looks to keep winning against the 18-5 Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts. That sounds vaguely offensive to say. Trinaldo is 9 years older, 5 inches shorter, and gives up 4 inches in reach. Now, Trinaldo is a bit of a streaky kind of fighter, an odd mix of stats. Striking is okay, 3.04, 2.62. But backing it up is this infrequent knockout power or just straight up grinding to wins. And then his takedowns and ground game reflect that. He has a 1.03 average, 44% accuracy, which is like, that's not incredibly high, and it seems like a rounded game. He has 9 KO wins, 5 submission, but it's so infrequent to how these pop up that it seems like he's just the kind of fighter that just wins fights. I know that's a dumb way to put it, but it's like, he just finds ways to win, and it's just like, okay, that happened. Now, Roberts is similar, but as of now, he's much more of a finisher in comparison. 3.24, 3.01 in striking, 8 career KO wins. Obviously, it does open him up for finishes, but that's to be expected. He also has an available takedown game that's been relatively successful and has been something he can turn to into submission wins in some cases. Now, the favorite here is Trinaldo by a narrow margin, and some other sites have it dead even. But based on the first result, I'm going to disagree. I think Roberts' finishing ability and the very rounded nature, plus the large age difference, gives him an edge. In addition to Trinaldo's very streaky nature, it seems like he'll show up to fights and he just will not be ready for them based on the opponent. The opponent will just be better than him. And I think this will be a fight like that. But we finally made it to the prelims, and we're starting it off strong. 18-4-0-1. Blagoy Baga Ivanov, looking to rebound against the 19-7 Marcus Pazao Rogera de Lima. 2 inches in height and reach going to Lima. Now, Ivanov has not been incredibly successful over his UFC career. Only 2 wins over Tai Tuivasa and Ben Rothwell. But looking at his stats, he does have a 3.32 landed to a 4.15 absorbed. But there really hasn't been an abundance of power in his UFC fights like other people in the heavyweight division that have that stat. He has averaged a 1.06 takedowns, 6 coming over his last 3, though he only won 1 of those fights. So it seems like he's able to secure takedowns, but he struggles against higher level strikers or people who also have a great takedown game. Lima is also a little streaky, going win-loss for a good chunk of his career. He also has been a bit more all over the place in terms of how he approaches and handles fights. 1.14 takedown average, but in his last six fights, he's only secured them in 2 fights, 3 each. So it's much more of a technical or matchup skill than a game plan item. However, he also has low takedown defense and has been submitted a handful of times in the UFC. Striking also isn't incredibly high either way, but unlike Ivanov, he has had more power show up across his career, making it a bit more even, I guess. Now, Vegas likes Ivanov, and I'm going to disagree. Both fighters have been on and off, but Lima has the experience and is coming off back-to-back wins. I think with that momentum, with the experience, and with I feel like a better overall game and power than Ivanov, I like him here. 13-6, Brandon Raw Dog Royval. Why is that your name? Looks to build a streak against a 15-5, 0-1 Matt Danger Schnell. Royval is 3 years younger, 1 inch shorter, and giving up 2 inches in reach. Royval is a relatively rounded fighter, 3.16 landed, 2.57 absorbed, and he isn't much of a KO guy though. That striking is backed up by a dangerous ground game. He has 100% takedown accuracy, only a .73 average, 2 UFC submission wins, and a total career of 8. But my main point here is that he's very dangerous when not initiating takedowns and is more than capable of handling himself on the ground. And Schnell is similar in style, though his striking is a bit worse than Royval, 4.23, 4.17. Similarly, he has that low takedown average and a middling defense, backed up by the ability to handle himself on the ground in different positions, and he's also dangerous from the back. Schnell is also pretty good at getting to decision wins over just finishing a fight, which is just an important kind of skill. Favorite here is Royval, and I will agree, main point being the better striking of Royval, serving as a little bit of a leg up in comparison to the striking of Schnell. 7-2, Macy Chiazon looks to stop the surging 7-1 Norma the Immortal Dumont. 4 inches in height and 5 in reach, favoring Chiazon. Chiazon is a somewhat rounded fighter. By that I mean a 4.04 landed to a 2.56 absorbed, and the ability to throw takedowns, though it's not a major strength. Back to the striking though, she has the ability to overpower and drive up totals on her opponents, occasionally getting KOs, though there's only 2 total in her career. Her ground game is also present, is a little inconsistent, which leads me to believe it's another game plan thing, and that changes depending on the opponent. Dumont is a little similar, 3.96 landed, 2.20 absorbed, much more successful and aggressive ground game, a 1.28 average across the UFC fights and at least 1 in every fight. She has severely outstruck her opponents in wins, with the closest being a 47-68 difference, so there is a question how well she'll do in a closer bout, but that's all hypothetical. Vegas likes Dumont here, and this is a hard one for me. Dumont's ground game has been more present, less of a game plan thing, though she does only have a 45% accuracy. I am going to end up deviating and picking Chiazon here based off her ability to possibly keep it even with striking and maybe stay on the feet. But ending the prelims, we have 14-4, Randy Rude Boy Brown, looking to keep it going against 13-2, Chaos Oxfighter Williams. This is how he is officially listed on the UFC website. Williams being 3 years younger, 3 inches shorter, but only gives up a single inch in reach. Brown is a bit over the place. Some fights showcasing takedowns and control, others showcasing a 115-81 striking performance, with striking seeming to be more so his strength, with a 4.21 to 3.11, and a fairly consistent through theme of solid striking performances leading to unanimous decisions, knockdowns, or even KOs. He also has a variety of strikes that he can throw, and when it comes to the ground, it seems to be more of a has shown the capability to secure submissions off the knockdown or the takedown. Williams, besides having the coolest nickname on the card, is a striker and a finisher, with 3 of his 4 UFC wins coming by KO for 7 of his total wins. His power backs up a 5.0 landed to a 3.838 absorbed, and a lot of the time he can build striking leads throughout the fight and win by decision. In terms of a ground game, he only has a 50% takedown defense and doesn't really throw. Vegas likes Williams here by a narrow margin, and I'm sadly going to disagree. I think Brown has shown the ability to land secure takedowns, which is something Williams has struggled with. And despite Williams' really good striking and ability to put power out, I think if this goes to the ground for a long period of time, we end up in Brown's court. Finally, starting off the main card here, we have 36-16, Donald Cowboy Cerrone, taking his retirement fight against 28-15, Joe J. Lauzon. God, I hate saying that. Lauzon is 2 years younger, 3 inches shorter, but gives up 2 inches in reach. Cerrone is a finisher through and through. His last 6 fights have not gone that way. He has not won them. He has lost them, most of them by KO. He has a career totals of 4.43 to 4.49, with power and strike choice being his main strengths and the ability to string together combos. Those haven't been that present in his last 6, but in this fight it may matter a little more. He does have a ground game with 3 takedowns in his last 6. It has not been all that prevalent. Lauzon is a bit of a similar vibe. He is coming off a win. Lauzon is a bit of a similar vibe, though he is coming off a win. His striking is significantly worse, a 2.84 landed to a 5.39 absorbed. He relies much more on the ground game, where he has an average of 2.39 across his career, and he's able to grind control. He has also been able to build striking leads, but it isn't common. It seems to come against fighters where he is like a head above them. Cerrone is the narrow favorite with this one, and out of complete favoritism, I'm going to agree. Honestly, I think Liaozan is the hot hand with the 2 wins, and he has a very dangerous ground game that I'm not sure how Cerrone will handle, but favoritism Cerrone. 27, 12, and 1, Mauricio Shogun Hua. Looks to rebound against the 25 and 16, Ovince, OSP, St. Preux. With St. Preux being 3 inches taller and taking 4 inches in reach. Now, Hua is a pretty rounded fighter with a decent striking, 3.57, 2.71, but is definitely backed up by his ground game where he averages 2.12 across his career. He has still shown KO power, but it seems to be more reliant on having takedowns during the fight. St. Preux is similar, but the ground game and submissions have been much more prevalent as of recent, though his stand-up is similar to Hua's. And he has struggled with some better strikers in the UFC as of recent. And St. Preux is another odd fighter stat-wise. His striking looks rather poor on paper, 2.65, 3.07, but he has still shown the ability to put people down. Just look at his fight with Menafield. Grappling is more of his strength, though, and an average of 1.21 across his UFC fights and a very solid submission game. He has been shut down some fights, however, and thoroughly outstruck as a result. His last 2 only saw him succeed 1 takedown and get thoroughly outstruck. Favorite here is St. Preux, and I think this is honestly a hard one for me to call. St. Preux has a decent shot, but I like Hua. The striking percentage, better takedown percentage make me like him more, and while St. Preux plays really well off the back, really good submission games and very dangerous, I'm a kind of a sucker for Hua's history and his continued success and skill. But in what basically is a co-main event, but is the third fight here for some reason, 22 and 7, Michael Iron Chandler looks to stop his losses against 25 and 6. Tony El Kukui Ferguson. Ferguson is 2 years younger, 3 inches taller, and takes 5 inches in reach. Chandler is, despite his losses, a solid and rounded fighter. His striking is pretty good, 5.17, 4.98, and he has hung in there against some of the best, losing by KO to Oliveira and unanimous decision to Gaethje. In addition, he's got pretty solid chin and very adjustable ground game, capable of shooting takedowns and securing submissions. I know he's lost his last 2 fights in the UFC, but it was a good fight against Oliveira, and he succeeded in some aspects against Oliveira. Against Gaethje, he didn't look awful. It was a very good fight, and he's capable of putting up these good fights. It's just a matter of finishing it. Now, Ferguson is another formerly very good fighter, but in a very different way. Ferguson's strength is his toughness and sheer variety and unpredictability. Numbers-wise, striking is 5.15, 3.78, which is pretty good, but a lot of the perception is from the past. His recent fights have been very one-sided, with him either getting picked apart by better striking or just getting wrestled into oblivion. And I think that's the issue here, is that when looking at I will admit that in looking at some of the stats, you end up getting a picture of the past more than the present. And present Tony Ferguson has not looked like past Tony Ferguson. The explosiveness, the variety, it hasn't been there, and that's his main strength. And as a result, the favorite is Chandler, and without knowing that, I still would have picked Chandler. He looks better against high-level competition, and he seems to be in better shape, maintaining a good degree of his athleticism. And now we're finally at the godforsaken title fights. 11 and 4, Thug Rose Namajunas looks to keep the belt against the 18 and 4, Carla Cookie Monster Esparza. Rose is 5 years younger, 4 inches taller, and only taken 2 inches in reach. Rose is a heck of a fighter, a very good skill set that covers a lot of the UFC game, if you will. Her striking is close, 4.01, 3.88, but within that there's some good variety, decent power, and her ground game backs it up really well since it's nothing to scoff at. It also does a very good job to put the opponent in danger and force them to consider multiple factors and how she can pull off these submissions. Now, Esparza is a bird of a similar feather, but definitely plays on the ground game more. A 3.53 average compared to Rose's 1.78. She is a bit more of a grinder in that regard, not really submitting, not really finishing, but her fighting style backs that up very well, letting her put strength and power in that regard. Now, Vegas is running with Rose, and I'm going to agree. I know it's boring, but Rose's style and variety makes her dangerous, and she has handled good ground games before. But I do want to state a caveat. Esparza is talented, and while Rose has the age advantage, if Esparza can get Rose down early and get her in danger, we've seen Rose get finished by a slam, we've seen Rose lose some fights in pretty shocking ways. If Esparza is able to shock Rose and early, I think Esparza can pile on and maybe get an early stoppage or grind out a win in the first 2 rounds even. I think Esparza has a chance. I just like Rose in this fight. She looked really good in her last fight. Rose's style is very, very solid. And I think while Esparza isn't bad, I think Esparza's kind of ground-focused style is lacking against Rose's stand-up. And the final fight of this godforsaken card. 32-8, Charles Du Bronx Oliveira looks to keep his belt against the human highlight, Justin Gaethje. Only 4 inches in reach to Oliveira is the only real measurable size difference. Oliveira is a skilled fighter, a definite preference for the ground and a definite skill in that aspect. Although what do you expect with somebody with 20 submission wins? Additionally, his striking isn't technically good on paper, but it has proven effective. Obviously, his grappling and ground game taking that precedent. His grappling gives him those options, and oftentimes lets him catch his opponent with pretty good timing, looking back to the Chandler fight. Now, back to his ground game, he also does not need to be the one making the takedowns, and oftentimes capable of securing submissions from different positions. Backpacking people, playing off his back, a variety of ways. Now, Gaethje is also a fighter that excels in one aspect, fight of the night bonuses. In seriousness, Gaethje's striking is ludicrous, 7.51 to 7.81. And while, yes, the absorbed is higher, I'm talking more about the output. And also the fact that Gaethje's power is the equalizer here. Yes, he may get hit more, but when his punch puts you to sleep, the 3 you landed don't really matter. That also sums up Gaethje in a nutshell. It really is just high-octane aggressiveness with an intense variety of strikes, a really good way of putting someone against the cage, tying them up and laying into them then, vicious leg kicks to dampen them. And despite being a Division I wrestler, those don't exist, takedowns, and he does have, and that's all transferred into solid takedown defense at a 73%. Now, this is where it gets hard for me. Vegas likes Oliveira, and I'm going to pick Oliveira. I think the options he has to win are greater, and I think that gives him an edge in this fight. However, I said this to some friends in the Khabib fight. I thought Khabib was win, but I didn't count Gaethje out. Because Gaethje has this stupid X factor in his fights, where he only needs one shot. And if he can pick his shot, he can take you out of the fight and win. But in the end, I am going to say Oliveira. And really, this is an interesting card. It has some fun fights. The title fights are fun, and most of the main card is interesting. I think it's a card that suffers from the fact we're in the middle of the year and they're trying to build a bunch of stuff for later in the year. So some of the prelim fights don't really do much. They aren't super exciting with names. The early prelims fights didn't look too exciting. A lot of people who are starting out, struggling, or trying to fight for their contracts. In the end, this is an interesting card. It might be worth checking out. I'm mainly watching it for these title fights and the main card. Well, like, subscribe, comment on what I did wrong, what you'd rather see. Thank you for watching all the way through.